Formed in Jacksonville, Florida in 1964, Lynyrd Skynyrd quickly rose to fame with their distinctive blend of rock, blues, and country. Fronted by charismatic lead vocalist Ronnie Van Zant, the band became known for their gritty southern rock sound and legendary hits like Sweet Home Alabama and Freebird. Lynyrd Skynyrd captured the hearts of millions, but their meteoric rise was tragically interrupted on October 20th, 1977, when a plane carrying the band and their entourage crashed in a remote Mississippi swamp. The flight would end in tragedy, claiming the lives of 6 people, including Ronnie Van Zant, guitarist Steve Gaines, and backup vocalist Cassie Gaines. This is the story of the tragic last minutes of Lynyrd Skynyrd. The plane crash was a devastating event that left a deep sadness in the music world and the families of the members who didn't survive. The band's lead vocalist Ronnie Van Zant was buried in Jacksonville, Florida. Steve Gaines, the band's guitarist, and his sister Cassie, who was a backup vocalist, were laid to rest in their hometown of Miami, Oklahoma. Friends, family members, and fans came together at each funeral to honor them and the memory of Lynyrd Skynyrd. The band's journey had begun in the mid-1960s in Jacksonville, Florida. Under Van Zant's relentless leadership, Lynyrd Skynyrd developed a hard-driving southern rock sound that blended rock, blues, and country influences. By the mid-1970s, Lynyrd Skynyrd had established themselves as one of the leading bands in the southern rock genre. Despite internal tensions and lineup changes, Lynyrd Skynyrd's core members remained committed to their music and each other. Their gritty sound and Van Zant's raw, powerful vocals resonated with audiences across the country. However, as the band reached new heights of success, they also faced increasing challenges, including the pressures of fame and the rigors of constant touring. In 1977, Lynyrd Skynyrd released their 5th studio album, Street Survivors. The album was poised to be another success, featuring tracks that showcased the band's evolving sound and musical maturity. In the fall of 1977, Lynyrd Skynyrd was amidst their highly anticipated Street Survivors tour, promoting their recently released 5th album. Ironically enough, they had nicknamed the new tour the Tour of the Survivors and had only done 4 shows when the plane crashed that fateful night. The band performed their final concert with the classic lineup on October 19, 1977 at the Greenville Memorial Auditorium in South Carolina. The set list for that fateful night included fan favorites such as Saturday Night Special, That Smell, and concluded with Freebird. However, the tour's demanding nature and the condition of their chartered plane cast a shadow over their journey. Survivors, including drummer Artemis Pyle and guitarist Gary Rosington, recounted the harrowing moments leading up to and following the crash. They were using a Convair CV-240, a 30-year-old plane that had seen better days. The band members and crew were aware of the plane's issues, but due to the logistical demands of their tour, they had little choice but to continue using it. Just 2 days before the crash, the plane had experienced engine troubles, with flames shooting out of the right engine during a flight. Although at least one band member, Cassie Gaines, expressed doubts about flying on the Convair, Van Zant talked everyone into using it one last time. "If it's your time to go, it's your time to go," he joked just before boarding. Despite these warning signs, the band boarded the plane on October 20th, and the plane departed the airport at Greenville, South Carolina at 4:02 p.m. after being filled with 400 gallons of 100-octane, low-lead fuel. There were 24 passengers inside the charter flight, including the flight crew and band members. McCreary gave an ETA of 6:45 p.m. He also notified the flight tower that he had 5 hours of fuel on board and was given a weather briefing in return. 2.5 hours later, however, McCreary radioed air traffic control in Houston that they were low on fuel and just about out of it. The control center next granted McCreary's request to land at Macomb Airport in Mississippi. "We're not declaring an emergency, but we do need to get close to Macomb as straight and good as we can get, sir," McCreary stated. However, the pilot announced less than a minute later, "We're out of fuel." It was the last communication from the plane. Meanwhile, according to Billy Powell, everybody was just doing their own thing when the pilots alerted them to the situation. Artemis Pyle, a pilot himself, told everyone how to prepare for the inevitable crash. He recalled Van Zant shaking his hand as if to say goodbye, but instead of panicking, said Powell, everybody was sitting there praying. But it would be 10 harrowing minutes before the plane touched down. As the pilots desperately searched for a place to land, the plane lost altitude rapidly. In a last-ditch effort, they aimed for a clearing in the woods. The band had gone from playing cards while Van Zant napped on the floor to fearing for their lives. The plane glided at a 5-degree angle before finally heading into the trees near Gillsburg, Mississippi. "I remember we started clipping those pine trees," Powell said. "It felt like being rolled down a hill in a garbage can and being hit by about 100 baseball bats at the same time." The sounds he heard were the plane hitting the trees, some as high as 80 feet tall. "We landed in Mississippi pine trees, 3 feet thick," Powell described. It tore the plane completely apart in the 10 to 12 seconds it took to go from 200 miles to a dead stop. As recorded in the official accident report, even after the plane made an impact with the ground, the Convair skidded a total of 495 feet from the time it hit the first tree on the way down. The wings were torn off along the crash path. The cockpit smashed into a tree, killing McCreary and Gray, and the fuselage became separated. Inside, the cabin seats were torn apart as the plane continued on its path. Powell said, "I crashed into a table. People were hit by flying objects all over the plane. The top of the plane tore open as it glided through the trees, throwing people out and leaving a path of instruments and other items from the passenger section. At last, the aircraft slid to a stop in a swampy, wooded area." Powell crawled out of the wreckage and saw that the fuselage, cockpit, wings, and tail section had been just crushed to pieces. His nose, he discovered, was now separated from his face, and he was bleeding profusely. The musician sat on top of the airplane in shock for a few minutes, crying before he heard people calling for help. "I remember hearing Leon screaming, 'Get me out of here,'" he said. Leon Wilkerson suffered a double fracture to his left leg, a double compound fracture to his left arm, 6 broken ribs, one of which punctured his left lung, and severe facial damage, losing 15 teeth. Powell pulled off his t-shirt, clamped it over his nose, and began trying to help. Then he spotted Pyle trying to crawl out of the wreckage with a severe chest wound. Road crew member Ken Peden next exited the plane and, along with Powell and Pyle, set out for help. Pyle would later remember that his shoes had been knocked off. The men made their way through a thick brush to a small farm nearby. Thinking the men were escaped convicts, the farmer fired his rifle in the air before he realized they needed help. 20 others on the plane survived, among them band members Alan Collins, Billy Powell, Artemis Pyle, Gary Rosington, and Leon Wilkerson. Dozens of news crews flocked to the site of the crash and began to ask questions. Authorities still believed the plane ran out of gas. But why? Didn't they put enough gas in the tanks? After a lengthy investigation, the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board released its official investigation into the accident later that month. 9 separate findings were listed, including statements that both engines on the plane ceased to produce power because the aircraft's usable fuel was exhausted, and that the crew, Walter McCreary and William Gray, failed to adequately monitor the fuel flow, fuel consumption, and fuel quantity gauges. The crew also failed to take appropriate pre-flight action to ensure they had adequate fuel supply and flew for some time with the right engine's fuel mixture in the wrong position. The fuel exhaustion was contributed to by an engine malfunction of undetermined nature in the right engine, which resulted in higher than normal fuel consumption. That would explain why, on another flight 2 days earlier, Alan Collins witnessed a 10-foot flame shooting out of the right engine. Gary Rosington recalled that Alan was real upset. He didn't want to get on that plane. He said, "I'm not going to get on it because it's not right." Ironically, Artemis Pyle said that as the band took off that fateful day, they decided to secure a Learjet for future flights as well as a beautiful bus for the crew. "It was ridiculous for us to be on an old plane like that." In 1987, 10 years after the crash, the band reformed with Ronnie Van Zant's younger brother, Johnny Van Zant, stepping in as lead vocalist. This new lineup continued to tour and record, keeping the spirit of Lynyrd Skynyrd alive for new audiences. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe for more stories about rock legends. See you in the next one.